A shepherd of service, a champion of compassion, the people's pope.
His leadership, for his strength of leadership and his tenderness.
Today we pause to pray for the Holy Father.
Santa Maria, Mater Dei.
A pope of firsts, the first Latin American pontiff, the first Jesuit leader of the Catholic Church, and the first to call himself Francis.
Fratelli e sorelle, buonasera.
We are looking back at the Francis effect, a pontificate that touched the peripheries and changed the world, one heart at a time. Right now on Currents News, the legacy of Pope Francis.
Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum.
Catholics from all over the world descending on the Vatican, bidding farewell to Pope Francis. Just hours after the Holy Father said his own goodbye to them. This video taken on Easter Sunday, his very last blessing. Now the pastor, preacher, and Pope of the peripheries will lie in state at St. Peter's Basilica. I'm Christine Persichetti. When Jorge Bergoglio came to Rome in 2013, he only packed a small bag. He didn't think he'd be there for long. But history will record it as the city he died in after more than a decade leading the Catholic Church. From the moment he first stepped out on that balcony in St. Peter's Square, neither his life nor the papacy would ever be the same. He was known as the People's Pope. Born the son of Italian immigrants in Buenos Aires in 1936, Jorge Bergoglio was a chemist before joining the priesthood and a teacher of literature and psychology. As the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he was known as a champion of the poor, and after being elected Pope in 2013, a reformer. The first pope from the Americas and the first to take the name Francis after St. Francis of Assisi, dubbed the poor man of Assisi. Caring for the marginalized, those living on the peripheries, became the backbone of Pope Francis's pontificate. His advocacy on behalf of migrants and refugees evident through dozens of trips. One of his first apostolic journeys in 2013 was to the Italian island of Lampedusa to show his solidarity with migrants. Benvenuto! Papa Francesco! Benvenuto! Papa Francesco! One of his last was to Southeast Asia, where he promoted peace through interreligious dialogue. Pope Francis often spoke out against the war in Ukraine, and every night since the Israel-Hamas war began, he would call the only Catholic church in Gaza to remind them they are not forgotten.
Buonasera, Santo Padre.
Buonasera, come stai?
The Holy Father was an advocate for the environment. In 2015, he published his encyclical Laudato Si. The papal paper didn't just focus on technical solutions to climate change. Rather, the Pope encouraged Christians to find changes in their everyday lives. Since its creation, Laudato Si has inspired programs to fight climate change around the world. His 2019 Synod of Bishops on the Amazon was largely focused on environmental issues and the need to protect the Amazon rainforest. Synodality was a key concept of his papacy.
Voglio così riconoscere il valore del cammino sinodale compiuto, che tramite questo documento consegno al santo popolo fedele di Dio.
In 2024, Pope Francis closed the Synod of Bishops on Synodality, a 4-year process to make the global church a more open, welcoming, and inclusive place, empowering lay people, including young Catholics, and ensuring that women have a greater role in the church by giving them the right to vote at the Synod. He made history in January of 2025 by appointing the first woman as the head of a Vatican department. And Pope Francis was perhaps the most inclusive pontiff toward the LGBT community. But while he approved letting Catholic priests bless same-sex couples, he drew the line when it came to marriage.
Chiaro su questo, no? Il matrimonio è un sacramento. Matrimonio è un sacramento.
Mere months after being elected, the Pope opened a door to LGBT Catholics when responding to a reporter's question on the papal plane.
Se una persona è gay e cerca il Signore
e ha buona volontà, ma chi sono io per giudicarla?
As for heterosexual couples who divorce and then remarry, in 2015, Pope Francis said they were still welcome in the church.
Queste persone non sono affatto scomunicate, non sono scomunicate e non vanno assolutamente trattate come tali. Esse fanno sempre parte della Chiesa.
On the topic of abortion, the Pope always took a strong stance against it. Here he is in 2018, equating terminating a pregnancy to hiring a hitman.
È giusto affittare un sicario per risolvere un problema? Non si può, non è giusto fare fuori un essere umano, benché piccolo, per risolvere un problema. È come affittare un sicario per risolvere un problema.
In 2019, Pope Francis called on dioceses worldwide to set up a system for people to report clerical sex abuse, and he issued apologies for it.
Pedimos perdón. We ask for forgiveness.
The Holy Father also apologized for the abuse suffered by Indigenous children in Canada at Catholic-run residential schools.
En el drama sufrido por tantos de ustedes, por sus
I
familias,
humbly beg forgiveness for the evil committed by so many Christians against the indigenous peoples.
Pope Francis also liked to celebrate, often inviting various circus acts to perform at the Vatican. But his last celebration is one he won't see to its end. In December of 2024, Pope Francis opened the Holy Doors at St. Peter's Basilica to begin the Jubilee of Hope.
Il giubileo è per convertirsi, perché il nostro cuore divenga più grande, più generoso, più figlio di Dio.
The Vatican released an official cause of death. Pope Francis died of a stroke that put him into a coma. That led to heart failure on Easter Monday morning. His funeral rites were actually decided by the pontiff months before his death, the Holy Father publishing the details of the updated liturgical book in November of 2024. In it, the Holy Father simplified his funeral, focusing on his role as a humble bishop. The pontiff's funeral will be presided by the Dean of the College of Cardinals, Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re. The Pope chose his own final resting place outside the typical St. Peter's Basilica. He will be buried at St. Mary Major, where the Holy Father has often prayed before going on international trips. For more insight into the death of Pope Francis, let's bring in John Lavenberg, national correspondent for The Tablet. He'll be in Rome for the funeral. Hi, John.
Hi, Christine.
John, tell us about the next steps. The Catholic Church is about to begin a mourning period for Francis, right?
That's right. So once Pope Francis died and it was officially announced by the Vatican, a 9-day mourning period began. And that's a tradition that comes from ancient Roman tradition. A few other small things that will take place now. The Vatican will fly its flags at half staff, and the bronze doors to St. Peter's Basilica will be closed.
What can we expect to say? When can we expect to say that final farewell to Francis? When will he be buried?
So what will happen is in the coming days, Pope Francis' body will be transferred over to St. Peter's Basilica, where we'll rest in state for several days. That allows the faithful, dignitaries from nations around the world, as well as Catholic officials, to pay their final respects to Pope Francis. From there, the funeral will take place.
Right. Now, there's a unique tradition when it comes to the coffins of popes. I was reading about it, but I'm not totally clear. Can you explain to our audience what happens?
Yeah, so traditionally, when a pope dies, the body is placed in 3 coffins, one made of cypress, lead, and oak. However, last year, Pope Francis, and this is in line with a lot of things he did through his pontificate, he simplified those rites. So now the Pope's body will be buried in a simple wooden coffin with a zinc coffin placed inside of it. Again, this was an effort by him to really simplify those norms and really be humble, as he has throughout his pontificate in a number of ways.
People all over the world have already started praying for Pope Francis. The Bishop of Brooklyn, Robert Brennan, celebrated a mass in memory on April 21st. Here's some of what he had to say.
Thank God for the gift of Pope Francis and commend him to the loving care of the Lord and that eternal glory.
John, you attended that Mass. How else did Bishop Brennan console the people in the pews?
Well, I think, one thing that has to be noted is having a Mass in itself is one way Bishop Brennan, giving the faithful so early on that opportunity to mourn and pray for Pope Francis was a great gesture, and a hugely important one by Bishop Brennan. But I think when he spoke at the Mass, the word he kept going back to was hope. He emphasized that this is the Jubilee of hope. He emphasized how often Pope Francis spoke of hope, and he really emphasized that Catholics now should continue to pray for Pope Francis, but do so with that hope that he so often inspired us to live our lives with.
And John, you'll be leaving for Rome sometime this week. Tell us what happens at the Vatican after the funeral. Things are about to get very busy, right?
Very busy. So as it's happening right now, cardinals around the world are getting their travel plans ready. The ones that aren't in the Vatican will travel there. And so what happens is the Vatican enters a transition period called sede vacante. And that translates to the seat is vacant. And so the College of Cardinals will run the Vatican, run the church for a period of time until they select a date for the conclave. Once the date for the conclave is determined, the cardinals will enter into the conclave, and then soon after, we will find out who the next pope will be.
All right, John Lavenberg, national correspondent for The Tablet. Safe travels.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll hear more from Bishop Robert Brennan about the death of Pope Francis. The shepherd of the Diocese of Brooklyn speaks about how the faithful can honor the late Holy Father's memory. That's coming up later in this newscast. Currents News will be covering the historic funeral of Pope Francis live with Katie Vasquez and John Lavenberg at the Vatican. Visit thetablet.org for the latest on the funeral arrangements. The last time the world heard the Holy Father was on Easter Sunday. The Pope made a surprise appearance at St. Peter's Square, one that will forever remain in the hearts of the pilgrims who saw it in person. Sean Patrick Lovett has the report.
No one could have imagined that these would be the last words spoken by Pope Francis in public.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, buona Pasqua. Il maestro delle cerimonie di leggere il messaggio.
His message was coherent with his entire pontificate, a call for peace.
Nessuna pace è possibile senza un vero disarmo. L'esigenza che ogni popolo ha di provvedere alla propria difesa non può trasformarsi in una corsa generale al riarmo.
The Pope's death on Easter Monday morning was totally unexpected. He'd recently been increasing his public appearances. Even though he hardly ever spoke, it was clear he deeply desired to be among people. In fact, one of his last meetings was at a Rome prison on Holy Thursday. Pope Francis, known throughout the world as the People's Pope, wanted to live up to his name until the very last moment.
That was Sean Patrick Lovett reporting. The Diocese of Brooklyn's chancellor is in Rome. Monsignor Stephen Aguja arrived in the Eternal City on Easter Monday and spoke with Currents News from St. Peter's Square about how the faithful are feeling.
This morning, I did go into St. Peter's Basilica, and the news was just getting around. There were definitely people in the Basilica praying in the Blessed Sacrament Chapel, which is reserved for prayer. And those people that were in there certainly knew that the Pope had passed, and they were there praying for that, I'm sure.
To learn more about the life and legacy of Pope Francis, be sure to pick up the tablet at your local church. This heartfelt tribute to the People's Pope is a collector's issue that captures the profound impact of the humble Jesuit that reshaped the Catholic Church with compassion, humility, and a vision for a more inclusive world. This is more than just a newspaper. It's a keepsake honoring a pontiff who lived for the poor. You can also get future editions sent straight to you by subscribing online to thetablet.org. Pope Francis's final blessing for Easter 2025 was one filled with hope. He did not deliver the traditional Urbi et Orbi himself. Instead, it was read for him. Here is part of what he wrote and his last message to the world. On this day, I would like all of us to hope anew and revive our trust in others, including those who are different than ourselves or who come from distant lands, bringing unfamiliar customs, ways of life, and ideas. For all of us are children of God. Tonight, in memory of Pope Francis, we are taking a look back at one of our favorite moments when the Holy Father touched down in the Diocese of Brooklyn. The shepherd of all Catholics sending a message to the Big Apple.
¿Qué sería de la Iglesia sin ustedes?
Tonight on Currents News, the Pope's historic trip to New York City. The effect of his visit to New York City can still be felt today. Thousands were thrilled to be in the presence of the Holy Father during his two-day visit to the Big Apple. Right now, we take you back and remember those moments with Pope Francis. When Pope Francis arrived at JFK Airport in 2015, he was greeted by student musicians from Xaverian High School. The Diocese of Brooklyn on hand to welcome the Holy Father as he embarked on his Big Apple visit. His first stop, St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan for Vespers with priests and religious. Pope Francis was applauded when he gave thanks to the nuns and religious women in the U.S.
¿Qué sería de la Iglesia sin ustedes? Mujeres fuertes, luchadoras, con ese espíritu de coraje que las pone en la primera línea del anuncio del Evangelio.
The following day was a busy one for the Holy Father. He started at the United Nations, becoming the fourth pope to speak before the UN General Assembly, reminding world leaders of the basic human rights everyone deserves.
Vivienda propia, trabajo digno y debidamente remunerado, alimentación adecuada y agua potable, libertad religiosa y más en general, libertad de espíritu y educación.
The Pope then participated in an interreligious gathering at Ground Zero. Although he was in a place of pain and suffering, he recalled the heroism of the first responders on 9/11 while speaking about the better aspects of humanity.
Aquí en medio del dolor lacerante, podemos palpar la capacidad de bondad heroica
the capacity
de
of
la que es
heroic
capaz también el
goodness
ser humano.
that the human being is also capable of,
a la
the
que
hidden
siempre
force
debemos
that we
apelar.
must always appeal to.
He received a rock star's welcome from children at Our Lady Queen of Angels School in East Harlem, where he met with immigrants who receive help from Catholic charities.
Aunque sé que no siempre es fácil tener que trasladarse y encontrar una nueva casa, encontrar nuevos vecinos, amigos. No es fácil, pero hay que empezar.
The last stop in New York for the Pope, Mass at Madison Square Garden. Pope Francis reminded the thousands who took part in the celebration that God is always present amid the chaos of the city and asked them not to overlook the foreigners, the poor, and the elderly.
Y se convierten en parte de un paisaje urbano que lentamente se va naturalizando ante nuestros ojos y especialmente en nuestro corazón.
While he wasn't the Bishop of Brooklyn when Pope Francis came to New York, the now shepherd of the diocese, Bishop Robert Brennan, told us that he will remember the Holy Father as a leader that served with great humility.
There's a certain sense of sadness, but there's also a great sense of gratitude. We're grateful to the Lord for giving us Pope Francis for all these years, and to Pope Francis for his leadership, for his strength of leadership and his tenderness. How would he want us to honor his memory except to live the gospel of Jesus Christ? He called the gospel the joy of the gospel. How would he want us to live his memory but to live not for ourselves alone but for God and for others? How would he want us to honor his memory except to, in concrete ways, reach out to one another, to lift burdens from one another, and to help one another to see the power of the love of Jesus Christ? I think any kind of concrete action that we can take of either charity, of attention or hope would give great honor to his memory.
Bishop Brennan reminded us that during this Jubilee year, Pope Francis's earthly pilgrimage has ended, but his heavenly journey has just begun. Another defining moment of the Francis papacy. Still to come on Currents News, the youth of the Diocese of Brooklyn remember their time with the Holy Father during World Youth Day. Plus, the Pope never got to return to his homeland. Still, Argentina is remembering the first American Pope. Among the Holy Father's favorite trips are the ones he spent with young people, many of them from Brooklyn and Queens. Throughout his papacy, the Diocese of Brooklyn has sent some of the largest groups to World Youth Days all over the globe. Currents News' Jessica Easthope tells us how the Holy Father's presence changed some young lives.
His presence alone was moving.
We just saw the Pope! We can't stop crying. We just saw the Pope.
And his words inspiring.
You are not here by accident. The Lord has called you, not only in these days, but from the very beginning of your days.
Pope Francis shaped the church of today, impacting generations of young Catholics, vowing to bring inclusion and grace to an institution that welcomes all to witness Christ.
The Holy Father's message was a reminder that this church is for everyone, that the Lord calls you despite your weakness, that the Lord calls you despite your own fears and doubts.
During his papacy, Pope Francis attended 4 World Youth Days, 2013 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, 2016 in Krakow, Poland, 2019 in Panama, and most recently, 2023 in Lisbon, Portugal.
Hola from Portugal.
Where scores of pilgrims from the Diocese of Brooklyn, led by Bishop Robert Brennan, braved the summer heat, their hearts on fire with the love of Christ and the passion of a community with purpose.
It's worth everything just to see the look on their faces. People don't always remember all the things that is said at an event like this, but they remember that they were this close to the Holy Father.
In Lisbon, Pope Francis told the crowd that God is calling each of them by name, that he knows their uniqueness and embraces it. A message of hope for young people who historically have strayed from the church.
I've heard so many people say like, oh, like you feel like a presence of God when you see the Pope, but like, it actually was pretty crazy.
But that year, Pope Francis drew 1.5 million of them in, solidifying his legacy as the people's Pope.
Just to see him and to be with him this weekend and to pray with him is such a gift.
Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
The faithful in Argentina, the birthplace of Pope Francis, had long wished for a visit by the Holy Father. Last year, the Pope told reporters he wanted to go, saying, "They are my people," but that political matters had to be resolved first. Sadly, that trip was not to be, but that didn't matter to Argentines who flocked to churches across the country when the Holy Father's passing was announced, including here at San Jose de Flores Church in Buenos Aires, where Jorge Bergoglio began his priestly vocation. And that is this special edition of Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us, because we are putting your faith in the news. In honor of Pope Francis, we leave you with these happy moments from the Holy Father's 12 years as Pope.